Hello, and welcome to English for Philosophy students. And we are in our study of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We are in lesson number 53 in that book, and lesson number 6 in the rule number 7, that you should pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Now, last week we looked at the idea that life demands a sacrifice of what we love the most. And life, or being, or the nature of the universe, or God, whatever word you want to use to denote the way things are, seems to demand this sacrifice in order to bring about a better world, a better life for everyone. Our question last week was, why does life demand that? And if you remember, we said we would start our analysis with the truism, the fact that sometimes things do not go well. We also understood that sometimes things do not go well through no fault of our own. There is a flood or a tsunami. But many times things do not go well because we are holding to something which is not best. We are refusing to let go. We are loving something so much, and that something is ruining our lives. So, moving on, we also looked at the fact that there is a biggest possible sacrifice which would give the biggest possible reward. And usually the hardest thing to sacrifice, the thing we love the most, is either ourself or our child. And Jordan pointed out that in the death of Jesus Christ, Jesus gave up himself to redeem the world. And God the Father gave up his Son for the same purpose. And that's why the cross of Christ is the central occurrence, the central happening of all that happens in our universe. The cross of Christ is at the center. Now, let us move on and continue with this analysis. He said we will begin our analysis with the truism that things don't always go well. We will now continue our analysis. So, Jordan Peterson says, pain and suffering define the world. Wait, I gotta fix this. Pain and suffering define the world. Of that, there can be no doubt. It's a truism. Sacrifice can hold pain and suffering in abeyance. Hold in abeyance is one verb. It's a phrasal verb. and the object is inserted in the middle. Hold in abeyance is to hold back. Hold it back. So sacrifice can hold pain and suffering back to a greater or lesser degree. And greater sacrifices can do that more effectively than lesser. Of that, there can be no doubt. So it is for sure true. Everyone holds this knowledge in their soul. We know it instinctively that if we give a little sacrifice, we are not going to get a big reward. If we give a big sacrifice, it usually will bring a big reward. Thus, the person who wishes to alleviate suffering, who wishes to rectify the flaws in being, in other words, they want to fix the universe, set right that which is wrong and broken. The person who wants to fix things, who wants to bring about the best of all possible futures. Bring about is a phrasal verb meaning to make it happen. Who wants to create heaven on earth. This person will make the greatest of sacrifices, of self and child, of everything that is loved, to live a life aimed at the good. He will forego expediency. Forego means not take it. He will give it up. He will sacrifice expediency, which is what will help him. What is expedient helps him. He'll give that up. He will pursue the path of ultimate meaning, and he will, in that manner, bring salvation to the ever-desperate world. You know, Jordan Peterson said earlier in this chapter that these concepts, these ideas, are hard to grasp and hard to articulate clearly, but they are embodied in literature and in drama and in ritual. As I was reading this, I thought of one great piece of literature, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. In that book, you have a central character, a hero, who is just a little person. He's a hobbit, and somehow it falls into his power to save the entire world from evil. But the only way for him to do it is for him to sacrifice everything he loves. And he says at one point in the book that he has saved the world for other people, and that someone had to give it up in order for others to have it. And this again reminds me of the story of Jesus Christ, who had to die in order to save the world. He had to give it up. So in the greatest literature, someone once said that of all books written in all times, The Lord of the Rings might well be the best. Some magazine did a survey of the best books of the year, of the century, of the millennium, and of all time. And The Lord of the Rings was, I don't know if it was chosen as number one, but it was in the running for number one best book ever. And it talks about this very thing sacrifice, and the greatest sacrifice bringing the greatest good. Okay, let's move on. Next paragraph. But is such a thing even possible? Such a thing as giving everything you love to secure the best possible future? Is this simply not asking too much of the individual? It's all well and good for Christ, it might be objected, but he was the veritable Son of God. But we do have other examples, some much less mythologized and archetypal. Consider, for example, the case of Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher. After a lifetime of seeking the truth and educating his countrymen, Socrates faced a trial for crimes against the city-state of Athens, his hometown. His accusers provided him with plenty of opportunity to simply leave. He could have just walked away and avoid the trouble. But the great sage had already considered and rejected. Hold on. One moment. The great sage had already considered and rejected this course of action. His companion, Hermogenes, observed him at this time discussing any and every subject. Any and every subject other than his trial, and asked him why he appeared so unconcerned. Socrates first answered that he had been preparing his whole life to defend himself, but then said something more mysterious and significant. When he attempted specifically to consider strategies that would produce acquittal by fair means or foul, or even when merely considering his potential actions at the trial, he found himself interrupted by his divine sign, his internal spirit, voice or demon. Socrates discussed this voice itself at the trial itself. He said that one of the factors distinguishing him from other men was his absolute willingness to listen to its warnings, to stop speaking and cease acting when it objected. The gods themselves had deemed him wise above other men, not least for this reason, according to the Delphic oracle herself, held to be a reliable judge of such things. Okay, this is a long paragraph. I think it is possible that you understand it already, but let us read through it one more time. I will see if there is anything that occurs to me to clarify. Okay, but is such a thing even possible? Meaning, is it possible for a person to give all? You know, when the terrorists attacked the World Trade Center in New York City on 9/11, 2001, a lot of policemen and firefighters went into the building knowing that they might well be laying down their lives in order to save people. So I definitely think it's possible for people to give the ultimate sacrifice. But anyway, is such a thing even possible? Is this simply not asking too much of the individual? Well, I'm not asking someone to do it. The universe is asking. The individual himself feels the call. to be great and to do something that will bring a great result. It's all well and good for Christ, it might be objected, but he was the veritable Son of God. Okay, so this sentence is, I think you would call it sarcasm. That is really not the word we would use, but what just happened, I don't know. Come on. Socrates is making a false argument that he does not believe in order to refute that argument. So, in this case, he says, it's all well and good for Christ. He was the veritable Son of God. So, it's easy for Jesus to do this because he is the Son of God, but it is hard for us. You might object. Okay, so this is an objection to the idea that the universe demands this type of sacrifice of ordinary people. So, Jordan does not believe that Jesus was different from regular people in this regard. So he goes on to say, but we do have other examples. People who were not the Son of God who did the same. I just gave you the first responders at 9/11. He is going to give us Socrates. Socrates was given opportunity to leave Athens peacefully. He was also given opportunity to speak the words to recant his teachings. And he thought about how to save himself. But when, at a point, he stopped thinking of how to save himself, and he stopped trying to save himself. And he just talked about other things. He discussed any and every subject other than his trial. So he would talk about anything but the trial. And when asked why, he answered that he had been preparing his whole life. He had been thinking of how to defend himself at trial. But then something more mysterious and significant, when he attempted specifically to consider strategies that would produce acquittal. So, all his life he had been thinking of how to defend his philosophy and defend himself. But now that the time had come and he had to make a plan to save his own life, by fair means or foul. In other words, he was very smart and he could find a way to save his life, whether it was by pure logic and teaching or whether it was by sophistry or manipulation or clever words that he didn't believe. That would be methods foul. Methods fair would be pure reason. Methods foul would be manipulation and lies even. And he was thinking these thoughts, how he could achieve salvation for himself. Acquittal means not guilty. But while he was thinking of these things, he found himself interrupted by his divine sign, his internal spirit, voice, or demon. Found himself interrupted is a strongly passive form. He himself was interrupted He was not the actor, he was the object of the action, and he found himself to be interrupted. So it was a surprise to him. So this is an emphatic statement that the interruption and the communication came from outside. It was not from him at all. There's an assertion that something other than himself spoke to him. His spirit, his sign, whatever that is, his internal spirit, voice, or demon. And that voice told him not to defend himself, to lay down his life. He laid down his life voluntarily. He sacrificed. He was not a victim. He chose to die. Same as Christ. Same as Frodo Baggins. Socrates discussed the voice at the trial itself. He said that one of the factors distinguishing him from other men, so something unique about Socrates that most men don't have, is that he was absolutely willing to listen to its warnings. That's the internal spirit. In other words, when he heard that voice in his ear guiding him, he listened and obeyed. And he says most men just ignore it. He is absolutely willing to listen and obey. And to stop speaking and cease acting when it objected. So he was preparing his own defense to try to save his own life, and the still voice in his heart said, no. So he stopped. The gods themselves had deemed him wise above other men, not least for this reason. So this construction, not least for this reason, means this characteristic of him, that he was willing to listen and willing to stop talking and cease acting, was one of the main reasons, not the least reason, but one of the main reasons that the gods deemed him higher than other men, that the gods honored him. According to the Delphic oracle herself, who was held to be a reliable judge of such things. So the Delphic oracle said that Socrates was higher than most men, largely because he was willing to listen to the inner voice and stop talking and stop acting when he felt that check in his heart. Because his ever reliable internal voice objected to fleeing or even to defending himself, Socrates radically altered his view of the significance of his trial. He began to consider that it might be a blessing rather than a curse. He told Hermogenes of his realization that the spirit to whom he had always listened might be offering him a way out of life in a manner easiest but also the least irksome to one's friends. With sound body and a spirit capable of showing kindliness, and absent the throes of illness and vexations of extreme old age, Socrates' decision to accept his fate allowed him to put away mortal terror in the face of death itself, prior to and during the trial, after the sentence was handed down, and even later, during his execution. He saw that his life had been so rich and full that he could let it go gracefully. He was given the opportunity to put his affairs in order. He saw that he could escape the terrible, slow degeneration of the advancing of years. He came to understand all that was happening to him as a gift from the gods. He was not, therefore, required to defend himself against his accusers, at least not with the aim of pronouncing his innocence and escaping his fate. Instead, he turned the tables, addressing his judges in a manner that makes the reader understand precisely why the town council wanted this man dead. And then he took his poison like a man. Okay, another long paragraph. Let's move into it. Okay, because his ever reliable internal voice objected. Let me move this up. Ever reliable internal voice. Okay, so ever reliable means it is always reliable. It tells the truth. Not like a crazy person who hears voices that say, shoot the president, or you are a turkey, or crazy things. His inner voice, his inner spirit, possibly even the voice of God in his heart, always led him wisely. So, it is an ever reliable internal voice. Also, internal means it's not external. He is not hearing voices like a lunatic. This is something that potentially you and I might experience without being crazy. So, because his ever reliable internal voice objected to fleeing. So, inside his heart, he was like, it said, don't run. Or even to defending himself. So this means the ever reliable internal voice did not want him to run away, flee, or even to defend himself. He wasn't even allowed to argue in his own defense. Just let them do it. This is what the voice was telling him. So, because the voice told him this, Socrates radically altered his view of the significance of his trial. At first, he thought the trial was bad, and he needed to defend himself to escape death. But when his internal voice said, do not run, do not defend yourself, he thought, this voice is always true, always good advice. Maybe the trial is a blessing. By the way, this is a great attitude. To look at what God sends as good, even if it looks bad. To find the good in what God is drawing you toward is wonderful. But anyway, so he altered his view. He changed his mind about what the trial was in his life. It was a blessing, not a curse. He began to consider that it might be a blessing rather than a curse. He told Hermogenes of his realization that the spirit to whom he had always listened, the internal voice, might be offering him a way out of life. So maybe the spirit that he listens to, maybe it's even God, is giving him a gift of a way to die and leave this life, a way out of life, in a manner easiest, but also the least irksome to one's friends. Irksome means troublesome. So usually when you die of illness or old age, people have to take care of you, and that's troublesome. So this way of dying would be easy for Socrates because the poison is quick, and also not troublesome to his friends. Win-win. What's not to like? This is a good thing, maybe, he was thinking. So he was going to depart life with sound body and a spirit capable of showing kindliness, and absent the throes of illness. So this means maybe it's a blessing for me to be able to exit life, leave life, while I'm still strong and sound, and I'm not even sick. Sounds good, says Socrates. And also absent the vexations of extreme old age. Absent the something means without that something. It means that something is not a factor. Socrates' decision, by the way, look at this. This is the possessive of Socrates. You do not need to add an S. We do in speech, we say Socrates' decision, as if there is an S added. But in writing, you simply put this apostrophe after the final S in the word. So if a word ends in an S, you do not usually add apostrophe S. You just add the apostrophe. So, but you say it Socrates'. Socrates' decision to accept his fate allowed him to put away mortal terror. So to put it away means to overcome. Mortal terror, usually it means extreme fear, extreme terror, fear as life or death. The fear you feel when you are going to die is mortal terror. So he was allowed to put away mortal terror in the face of death itself. So he wasn't scared because of this decision to accept what the gods sent. So he put away mortal terror in the face of death, meaning when he was confronted by death, he was not afraid. Prior to and during the trial, so he had no mortal terror, he had no fear before the trial, no fear during the trial. After the sentence was handed down, no fear. No fear after he had had a death sentence passed. And even later, during his execution itself, he had no fear. He saw that his life had been so rich and full that he could let it go gracefully. It's like saying, I have had enough. You can have some now of food. He had had enough. He had had a great life. He was given the opportunity to put his affairs in order. This means if you know you are going to die, you may want to write a will. You may want to pay off any debts. You may want to say goodbye to loved ones. These are putting your affairs in order. He saw that he could escape the terrible slow degeneration of the advancing years. So he saw that old age is a very uncomfortable time and he would never have to experience it. He came to understand all that was happening to him as a gift from the gods. So this phrase, he came to understand. We don't say he understood that. We say he came to understand. This means that the understanding developed gradually. It did not come all at once, but over time, he developed an understanding that all that was happening to him was a gift from the gods. He was not, therefore, required to defend himself against his accusers. So, if the whole thing was a gift, even death, he didn't need to fight and defend himself and try to save his life. No. At least, not with the aim of pronouncing his innocence. He might want to defend his philosophy for the good of the listeners, but not to save himself. Not with the aim of escaping his fate either. Instead, he turned the tables. That means he was supposed to be the victim. He was supposed to lose power. He was supposed to be humiliated. He was supposed to be hurt. He turned the tables and he became victorious, unhurt. His listeners ended up losing the battle because of the way he faced this and what he said and how he died. He turned the tables, meaning reversed the action that was happening, addressing his judges in a manner that makes the reader understand why the council wanted him dead. So instead of being afraid, he spoke strongly and with authority to these judges who couldn't shut him up. And we see why they wanted to kill him, because they couldn't shut him up. They couldn't make him be quiet. And then he took his poison like a man. That phrase, like a man, usually involves receiving punishment with courage and dignity. Often it is used of boys and children who are taking a whipping like a man. They don't run away, cry, scream, try to escape. They walk up and bend over and get a whipping. Take it like a man. That's what they say. Socrates rejected expediency and the necessity for manipulation that accompanied it. So, expediency for Socrates would have been trying to save his own life by his wits. And that would have involved saying things that were clever but maybe not true, manipulating the judges to save his own life. So Socrates rejected expediency, trying to save his life, and the necessity for manipulation that accompanied it, meaning expediency. If you're not going to try to get the expedient result, you don't have to fight. You don't have to manipulate. You don't have to defend yourself. He chose, instead, under the direst of conditions, to maintain his pursuit of the meaningful and the true. So, Socrates was no victim. He chose what he would do. He listened to his voice, which said, don't fight. He didn't fight. He chose the good that the gods were sending him. And he defended the truth of his philosophy in his final speeches. That which was meaningful and true, he chose. Under the direst of conditions, that would be the worst possible conditions. 2,500 years later, today, we remember his decision and take comfort from it. And what can we learn from this? If you cease to utter falsehoods and live according to the dictates of your conscience, you can maintain your nobility, even when facing the ultimate threat. If you abide truthfully and courageously by the highest of ideals, you will be provided with more security and strength than will be offered by any short-sighted concentration on your own safety. If you live properly, fully, you can discover meaning so profound that it protects you even from the fear of death. So this is what we learn from Socrates and others since him. Other names are coming to my mind. If you cease to utter falsehoods, so cease means stop. Utter means speak. So if you stop speaking falsehoods, which is lies, in other words, you stop saying things that are not true, and if you live according to the dictates of your conscience, your inner spirit, your inner voice, then you can maintain your nobility even when facing the ultimate threat. When you are facing the ultimate threat, the enemy is trying to humiliate you, usually. Think of what they did to the Jews before they killed them in the concentration camps. They degraded them. But you can maintain your nobility no matter what they do to you if you do not utter falsehoods and you follow the dictates of your conscience. If you abide truthfully and courageously by the highest of ideals. So abide is sort of like living. If you live by the highest of ideals. And abide also means stay within it. Stay in the highest of ideals all the time. Then you will be provided with more security and strength than will be offered by any short-sighted concentration on your own safety. So, for example, if you live by high ideals and then the mob attacks you and asks you to apologize for your racist statement when you were not racist, or your politically incorrect opinions when you are not. Well, you may be, but they want you to apologize. But for you to apologize would be a falsehood. It would be a lie. Don't do it. If you live by high ideals and refuse to lie about it, security and strength will be offered to you, even if they ruin your life. It will be more security and strength than you would have gotten if you had focused on saving yourself, short-term expediency, and then concentrated on your own safety. If you live properly, so he is not saying that this is a high ideal for only Jesus and Socrates and a few handful. He's saying it is proper for all of us. If we live right, if we live correctly, as we should, that is what live properly means. Also fully, if we live fully, properly and fully, kind of like don't utter falsehoods and live according to the dictates of your conscience. Live properly and fully. You can discover meaning so profound that it protects you even from the fear of death. Earlier we were talking about what is meaning. We can't really understand. We're evolving into our understanding of what is meaningful. Well, if we live this way, we will discover it. And it will be so profound that we won't even fear death. Remember, as we close for today, an image of the holy martyrs in the first century of the Christian church, marching to the arena where they would be fed to the lions, singing joyful hymns. They weren't singing joyful hymns because they were so scared trying to cheer themselves up. They were excited because they had the blessing to go to heaven now, just like Socrates. It was a gift, and they were going to see Jesus, and they were going to go to heaven. And they didn't fear death. It says in the Bible, it basically says they didn't fear death. I'm trying to get my shoe on. Oh, there it goes. So let that be the image. People who have discovered something worth dying for and worth living for. So let's stop here, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.